Are you ready to learn the truth about what was hidden behind the luxurious facades of Victorian mansions? We are used to seeing the glamour of balls and exquisite dinners, but we rarely think about the price of this splendor. Behind the impeccable cleanliness and order stood an invisible army whose lives resembled a complex mechanism. These people had no right to fatigue, personal space, or their own desires. Their names were erased and their personalities dissolved into the strict rules of the service hierarchy. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn what unwritten rules turned the lives of servants into endless, exhausting labor that was not discussed in polite society. What if I told you that the harshest dictatorship of the 19th century existed not in the army, but in an ordinary kitchen? The lives of servants were subject to the strictest ranking, where everyone knew their place and feared losing it. At the head of this world stood the butler and the housekeeper, whose authority was absolute and unquestionable. They decided the fates of dozens of people, deciding who was worthy of promotion and who would be dismissed without recommendation. For the junior servants, these figures were like generals whose orders were not to be questioned. Any deviation from the established order was punished immediately and severely. Discipline was maintained not by shouting, but by icy glances and a system of fines. Being a minute late could cost an employee a day's wages. The hierarchy even permeated mealtimes, when the servants sat down at the table in strict order of seniority. No one dared to speak until permission was given by the senior member. This created an atmosphere of constant tension, where everyone watched everyone else. Junior footmen and maids lived in fear of making a mistake in front of the elite of the service hall. There was an invisible wall of alienation between the different groups of servants. A maid was not allowed to be familiar with a cook, and a footman looked down on a dishwasher. This disunity was beneficial to the owners, as it prevented the servants from uniting. Everyone clung to their tiny piece of privilege, afraid of slipping down a step. The lowest rung was the dishwashers, whose work was the dirtiest and hardest. They spent their days elbow-deep in greasy water, cleaning endless mountains of dishes and pots. Their hands became rough and cracked from constant contact with alkali and hot water. But even they dreamed of climbing the ladder someday. The transition from one category to another could take years of impeccable service. Promotion depended not so much on talent as on the ability to be inconspicuous and convenient. A servant had to become a shadow, anticipating the wishes of his masters before they were even voiced. A person's personality was erased, giving way to the function he performed. This closed system created a special kind of psychological pressure. People spent years stewing in the same pot, accumulating resentment and mutual grievances. But the outer facade always remained impeccable, hiding the internal drama. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What do you think about such a system of total control? Write about it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about how every morning began for a Victorian maid? Long before the first rays of sunlight touched the rooftops, hard work began in the house. The main task was to prepare the fireplaces in the living rooms while the owners were still asleep. It was a dirty, cold, and incredibly tiring procedure. The maid had to slip silently into the room, carrying a heavy bucket of coal and tools. In the dark and cold, she knelt in front of the fireplace. The first thing she had to do was clean out the ashes left over from the previous evening. The ash dust instantly settled on her skin, clothes, and hair, penetrating her pores. But the most unpleasant part was polishing the cast iron grate with a special compound. This graphite-based product, called black lead, required enormous effort to apply. It had to be rubbed in with a stiff brush until it shone like a mirror. The slightest speck of rust or dullness could provoke the housekeeper's wrath. Therefore, the girls rubbed the metal with such zeal that their hands went numb. The graphite paste ate into the skin so deeply that their hands always looked gray. It was almost impossible to wash off this coating, even with harsh soap. In addition to the grate, the marble mantelpiece and railing had to be cleaned to perfection. Any trace of soot on the light-colored stone was considered a sign of negligence. The work required the precision of a surgeon in poor visibility conditions. One awkward movement could stain the expensive carpet with ash. After cleaning came the kindling stage, which was a real art. The fireplace had to burn quickly and without excessive smoke. If the room filled with smoke, it was considered a gross violation of professionalism. Firewood and coal were stacked according to a special pattern for optimal draft. There could be more than a dozen such fireplaces in a large house, and each one required attention. Maids ran from room to room, dragging heavy boxes behind them. By the time the owners woke up, the house had to be warm. It was a race against time that was repeated day after day, without a day off. In winter, the workload increased many times over, turning the morning into a real marathon. The cold metal of the grates burned their fingers, and drafts chilled their backs. The maids' knees suffered from constantly standing on the hard floor. Over time, chronic joint pain and occupational diseases developed. But there was no one to complain to because there was a line of people waiting to take their place. Morning chimney sweeping was the foundation of Victorian comfort. The warmth in the house came at the cost of young women's worn hands and sore backs. None of the guests warming themselves by the fire thought about how much effort went into keeping the flames burning. Why do you think this hard work was considered exclusively a woman's duty? Next, we will talk about the sound that haunted servants even in their sleep. What if I told you that the house had its own nervous system made of copper and wire? In the service corridor, a row of numbered bells hung on the wall, each corresponding to a specific room. This panel was the control center for the lives of all the staff. The sound of a bell was an order that demanded an immediate response, no matter what the servant was doing. This system looked simple, but it was actually a complex mechanism that allowed the owners to control all the servants from a distance. The homeowners were proud that they could summon any servant with a wave of their hand without having to go from room to room. The bells were made so that their ringing could not be confused with other sounds, and it stood out even in the noise of a large house. The panel itself resembled a dashboard on which life bustled day and night. A system of wires ran through all the floors, hidden in the walls and under the floor. As soon as the owner pulled the cord in the living room, a ringing sound would be heard in the basement. Experienced servants could tell the mood of their masters even by the nature of the ring. A sharp, short ring meant impatience. A long, insistent ring meant anger. For the servants, this copper web was like a living creature watching their every move. Sometimes they said among themselves that the house seemed to breathe and move when someone upstairs pulled the cord. Sometimes it even seemed that the wires transmitted not only the ringing, but also the mood of those who pulled them. Such sensitivity to details was necessary because the peace of mind of the workers depended on the correct reaction. This sound produced a reflex in people similar to that described by academician Pavlov. Hearing the ringing, the servant would drop everything and run upstairs. It did not matter whether he was eating, sleeping, or had just sat down to rest. Ignoring the call was an unthinkable offense. Over time, this reflex became so strong that people would flinch even at the accidental clatter of dishes or the loud slam of a door. The body tensed up on its own, without the mind's command, and the person was already mentally rushing up the stairs, even if it was a false alarm. Many recalled that they had to force themselves to relax because their bodies were in a constant state of readiness. And the longer a person worked in such a house, the more deeply this habit became ingrained in their behavior. The most exhausting thing was that the bell could ring at any second. This created a state of constant, anxious alertness that never let up. It was impossible to relax, knowing that the silence could be broken at any moment. The psychological tension of waiting was worse than the work itself. Even in rare moments of calm, the servants felt their attention remain fixed on the panel with the bells. Conversations fell silent when the house became particularly quiet, because everyone knew it was about to ring. This anticipation sapped their strength and made the days seem longer than they actually were. No amount of endurance could cope with this constant inner trembling. Often the calls were completely trivial and meaningless. The mistress might ring to have a book brought to her from the table next to her, or to have a pillow adjusted that she could reach with her hand. For the servant, this meant climbing several flights of stairs for a task that took only a second. This attitude gradually made the staff feel invisible. Their energy was wasted on things that the owners didn't even consider work. The calls became a way to show their power rather than a real need. The servants understood this, but they had to obey because complaining was impossible. In large houses, the distances were enormous, and running up and down the stairs took hours. Footmen and maids walked miles, shuttling between the basement and the upper floors. Their legs ached with fatigue, but they couldn't stop. Because of this workload, young servants aged faster than their peers. Some had sore joints, others had constantly swollen feet. Even strong men felt that their bodies were wearing out. Large houses required not only obedience, but also physical endurance, which was difficult to maintain over the years. Night calls were a separate form of torture for tired people. The servant on duty had to sleep with one eye open so as not to miss a call. Interrupted sleep did not allow for recovery, leading to chronic fatigue. People turned into zombies, mechanically carrying out commands. It often happened that a person barely had time to fall into a light slumber before the bell rang. He would get up so abruptly that he would sometimes lose his balance or bump into the wall in the dark. After several such nights, the body began to live on its own, and the mind floated in a fog. But no one dared complain because night duty was considered a normal duty. The bell system depersonalized communication between masters and servants. It was a remote control for living people. The person on the other end of the line was perceived simply as a mechanism for fulfilling wishes. The masters themselves rarely thought about how their signals were perceived below. For them, the ringing was part of the natural order, where everyone knew their place. The lack of personal contact only widened the gap between the two worlds. Sometimes it seemed that both servants and masters lived in the same house, but in different universes. Repairing this system also fell on the shoulders of the staff or invited craftsmen. Tangled wires or broken springs could cause panic in the house. After all, without this connection, the comfortable life of the mansion would instantly come to a halt. Servants often spent a long time looking for damage, sorting through meters of wire in the narrow spaces of walls and floors. Each such failure turned into a small emergency because the owners did not tolerate malfunctions in the house. And if the bell jammed or rang by itself, it led to conflicts and suspicions. The system required constant attention, like a capricious animal. This copper tyrant controlled the time and will of dozens of people. The sound of the bell was so ingrained in their subconscious that the servants could hear it even in silence. It was a symbol of their complete lack of freedom and submission to someone else's will. If you found this fact interesting, please like this video. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of human physical capabilities? Victorian houses were designed to hide hard work, not to make it easier. There were special black stairs that the servants used to move around. They were narrow, steep, and poorly lit, making every step dangerous. Not only did they have to carry themselves up these stairs, but also huge loads. The main load was coal, which was needed to heat all the rooms. Metal buckets of coal weighed a lot, and they had to be carried to the top floors. Fragile young women lifted tons of cargo during their careers. Water was the second enemy of the servants' backs and hands. In houses without running water, hot water had to be delivered manually to the upper floors. Heavy copper jugs and basins had to be constantly refilled. The master's morning bath cost the servants a dozen trips up and down the steep stairs. In addition to coal and water, trays of food, clean linen, and furniture were carried up the stairs. Any movement of household items was carried out exclusively by muscle power. There were no elevators or lifts to ease this burden. The narrow stairwells often caused injuries and falls. The maids' long skirts would catch on the steps, and their busy hands prevented them from grabbing the railing. Falling with a heavy bucket of coal could end in tragedy, but even an injury was rarely a reason for a long rest. The architecture of the house clearly separated areas of comfort and areas of work. The main staircase was wide and gentle, designed for a leisurely descent in evening gowns. The servants' staircase was a functional shaft for moving resources. This contrast clearly demonstrated the attitude towards the staff. Physical exertion led to premature aging. Women suffered from internal organ prolapse and varicose veins. Men strained their backs carrying heavy chests and furniture. By the age of 30, many of them felt like old men. It was especially hard on days when there were large receptions and balls. The flow of food, drinks, and dishes had to circulate smoothly. The servants' legs literally buzzed with tension by the end of the evening, but they had to maintain their posture and ease of movement. Each floor added kilograms to the weight they had to carry. Those who served the attics or upper bedrooms performed the work of a dock worker, and all this was done in uncomfortable uniforms and tight shoes. The geometry of a Victorian house was the geometry of suffering. The walls of the mansion absorbed the sweat and silent moans of those who kept it alive. It was a vertical marathon with no finish line. Could you work like this for even one day? In the next chapter, you will learn about a place where even in winter, the water froze in the jugs. The living conditions of the servants were strikingly different from the luxury of their masters' quarters. They were usually given rooms in the attic or in the basement. Attics were the most uncomfortable places in the house, stuffy in summer and freezing in winter. The roof heated up in the sun, turning the room into an oven, or froze through in the cold. In summer, the air under the roof became so stagnant that even open windows did not provide relief from the heat. Many servants slept with almost no blankets to make the nights a little easier. In winter, they put on everything they could to keep from freezing until morning. Often, they had to share one thin blanket between two people to keep warm. There was virtually no insulation in these rooms. The wind whistled through the cracks in the window frames, blowing snow onto the windowsills. Often in the morning, the water in the wash basin was covered with a crust of ice. To wash, they had to break the ice, shivering from the cold. Some servants got up before their shift to warm their hands over a candle. Even their breath turned into steam that rose above the bed. On particularly cold nights, people woke up with their teeth chattering, but no one complained because they understood that they would not be given better conditions anyway. The rooms were sparsely furnished with discarded items, old beds with lumpy mattresses, rickety chairs, and peeling dressers. There was no room for comfort or beautiful things here. Everything was purely functional and devoid of individuality. Often the furniture was so worn out that it creaked with every movement. The mattresses sagged under a person's weight, causing the body to ache in the morning. The chairs wobbled so much that people were afraid to sit on them, but the servants had to be content with what they were given because there were no other options. Space was extremely limited, with several people often living in one room. The beds were placed close together, leaving no room to walk between them. There was no such thing as personal space. Every step and breath was visible to neighbors. Whispers and rustling noises continued until the wee hours of the night, because someone was always tossing and turning or coughing. It was impossible to hide even your emotions here, because every gesture became public knowledge. Minor conflicts often flared up due to the cramped conditions, but people quickly made up, realizing they had no choice. Everyone just tried to stick together to survive in such conditions. Lighting in the attics was sparse, often limited to a single candle. Saving on candles and fuel for the servants was common practice. In the evenings, people had to mend clothes or read in the dim light, damaging their eyesight. Gas lighting was installed there last. Sometimes the servants brought the leftover candle stubs they had collected in the kitchen to prolong the evening a little. The light from these stubs flickered and flashed, creating the impression that the walls themselves were moving. Their eyes were blurred with fatigue, but they had to continue working. And every evening was like the one before, as if time had stopped in the attic. Sanitary conditions also left much to be desired. There was often only one bathroom for the servants on the entire floor, or none at all. They had to wash in parts using a basin and a jug of water. This created hygiene problems, despite the requirements for cleanliness. Sometimes we had to stand in a long line just to wash up before starting work. Hot water was a rare luxury, used only on major holidays. People tried to keep things tidy, but in such conditions, it was almost impossible. And yet they were required to maintain perfect cleanliness in the performance of their duties. The walls were often bare or covered with the cheapest wallpaper. Dampness and mold were frequent guests in these rooms. The smell of dampness permeated clothes and bedding. This contributed to frequent colds and lung diseases. During rainy seasons, the ceiling would sometimes leak, and water would run down the walls in cold streams. The servants tried to put buckets underneath, but the sound of dripping water made it hard to sleep. The dampness penetrated everything, leaving gray stains on belongings. This made the rooms even gloomier than they already were. The view from the small dormer windows was limited to the roofs or the backyard. The servants were cut off from the beautiful landscapes of the park or garden. Their world was limited to gray skies and roof tiles. This emphasized their detachment from the lives of their masters. Sometimes the voices of guests walking in the garden and enjoying the fresh air could be heard through the windows. But the servants could only look at the narrow strip of street or the smoke from the kitchen chimneys. This separation seemed particularly cruel on clear sunny days. It was a constant reminder that they were at the bottom of the household hierarchy. Storing personal belongings was a problem due to the lack of closets. All of a servant's possessions had to fit into a single chest under the bed. This taught them not to become attached to things and to be content with little. Any extra item became a burden. Many kept only the bare essentials, a couple of changes of clothes, small souvenirs, and letters from family. Sometimes people shared a single trunk between two of them in order to somehow fit their belongings inside. This created confusion and unnecessary arguments, but there was very little else they could do to keep their personal belongings safe. The attic was a place where servants came only to sleep, exhausted. It was not a home in the full sense of the word, but rather a temporary shelter. Here they regained their strength so that tomorrow they could go back downstairs and serve again. Sometimes they dreamed of having their own corner where they could feel free for at least a minute. But reality reminded them that the attic was the limit of their possibilities. Every evening, people climbed up here, dragging their tired bodies upstairs, and every time they had to convince themselves that the new day would be at least a little easier than the previous one. Are you ready for the shocking truth about what happened in laundries? Laundry in the Victorian era was not just a household chore, but a dangerous industry. It was an exhausting process that took several days a week and required working with harsh chemicals. The big wash usually began on Monday and turned the lives of laundresses into hell. The main enemies of the skin and lungs were the chemicals of the time. Caustic lye, soda, and various chlorine-based bleaches were used. These substances corroded the hands, causing painful cracks and ulcers. The skin of laundresses was always red, inflamed, and rough. Huge copper boilers with boiling water created unbearable stuffiness in the room. Steam filled the entire space, making the air heavy and humid. Visibility was almost zero, and it was difficult to breathe, as if in a bathhouse. Due to the constant dampness, the women's clothes were soaked through. The physical strain of washing was enormous. Wet laundry, especially bedding and tablecloths, weighed a lot. It had to be turned over in the cauldrons with wooden tongs, beaten and wrung out by hand. The muscles of the back and arms were in constant tension. The rinsing process required ice-cold water, which created a sharp contrast in temperature. Hands were immersed from boiling water into cold water, which led to rheumatism and arthritis. The joints of the fingers were deformed and constantly hurt, but it was impossible to stop until the mountain of laundry disappeared. Washing starched items such as collars, cuffs, and aprons was particularly difficult. The starch had to be boiled and applied hot so that the fabric would hold its shape. Such items had to be ironed with heavy cast-iron irons heated on the stove. The risk of burns was a constant companion in this work. The amount of laundry in a wealthy household was incredible. Dozens of changes of linen, tablecloths, napkins, staff uniforms. All of this had to be perfectly clean. A stain on a tablecloth could cause a scandal and lead to dismissal. Therefore, every stain was scrubbed away with maniacal persistence. Ventilation in basement laundries was often poor. Chemical fumes accumulated, causing coughing and headaches. Chronic respiratory diseases were a professional ailment of laundresses. They literally burned their lungs at work. Drying laundry in the damp English climate was a separate problem. Ropes were hung in rooms, creating mazes of wet sheets. The humidity in the house increased, which did not improve the health of the inhabitants. In the summer, they tried to dry their laundry outside, but the weather often made adjustments. This hellish work remained completely invisible to the residents of the upper floors. Every morning, they received fresh, crisp laundry that smelled of lavender. No one thought about the fact that this smell of cleanliness was paid for with the health of the women in the basement. Do you think it is fair that the hardest work was the lowest paid? In the next chapter, you will learn why servants did not even have the right to their own thoughts. In the world of Victorian servants, the concept of privacy was completely absent. Personal life was not divided into mine and others. Everything belonged to the house, the schedule, and the rule of observation from above. Servants saw and heard their masters, and the master could suddenly appear anywhere in the servants' world. Even sleeping quarters were designed not for human comfort, but for the sake of controlling movement. The house was not a place of refuge, but a machine of order, precise and strict, and this machine did not let anyone into the shadows. Servants lived in conditions of total visibility, where other people's field of vision was constant. This applied not only to rooms, but also to corridors, kitchens, staircases, and doors, where every step could be seen. The servants' work areas were located so that they could be quickly passed through and just as quickly inspected. The master or senior servants could see who was going where and why. Therefore, the space was deliberately made controllable from every point, and people lived with this. The doors to the servants' rooms usually had no locks or internal bolts. This was part of an architecture of power and mistrust, where a lock was considered a sign of secrecy, and secrecy was considered a threat. Maids and footmen understood that a private door did not mean a barrier, it meant a passageway. At any moment, the housekeeper could enter to check on the order or simply to exercise her authority as a senior over a junior. This could happen in the middle of sleep or rare rest, and rest was not rest. The personal belongings of the servants were not considered inviolable because it was an era of order over man. A chest, a box, a bundle of cloth, everything could be searched. People did not argue because arguing would mean the immediate collapse of their reputation and dismissal would mean a total collapse of their income and life. They searched for everything, from stolen food to alcohol, from banned books to tobacco or personal letters. It was the norm where privacy was not attached to anything, and no one asked questions. Senior servants looked for signs of insubordination, even in the smallest details. Servants could not keep things that smelled or gave away their owner. The master wanted to see order, not the necessary personality. Things were washed, dried, and stored compactly, and compliance was the norm. Correspondence was a zone of special supervision. The owners considered themselves entitled to know about the moral character of their servants. Letters could be opened and examined for tone and circle of correspondence. If a letter contained hints of friendship outside the home, especially with people outside their circle, it was considered a threat of influence. Senior servants reported such letters immediately. Any suspicious connections were suppressed, and people were afraid. A letter addressed to a servant was not a letter in silence. It was a letter to the house, where it became part of the common field of vision. Servants knew in advance that they could not write about themselves. They wrote about work or prayed in words. It was a style. Conversations between servants, even in the kitchen, were not safe because ears were everywhere in the house. Warm areas, the kitchen and laundry room, became places for exchanging news and informing on each other at the same time. Senior servants encouraged mutual surveillance to please their masters and keep their income in winter. Any word spoken could reach the butler in a minute. Even if people spoke quietly, it was the job of the house to watch their words, not their meaning, and that broke trust. Sometimes conversations were deliberately held in the noisy kitchen, where the fire crackled louder than words. But even there, one's personality was not protected. It was part of the general background noise. It became a habit of control, and people did not argue. Romantic relationships in the house were strictly forbidden in many large mansions. If a maid and a footman were caught flirting, dismissal followed almost immediately. It was a rule of reputation where no service could allow an internal romance that would spoil the image of the house outside the gates. It was believed that servants should be married only to their function, just as a brick in a house is married to a wall. Marriage and family were an unattainable dream for many servants. Therefore, their life was work and function. Excommunicating a servant's personality from work due to a lack of romance was considered the norm because the house wanted a pure function. Family was not welcome inside the house. It was part of the filter of order, and people suffered. Collective sleep was the form where it was most difficult to hide from the world, because the sleeping room could also be entered at any moment. Servants slept in small rooms, but several people at once, because functionally it saved space, supervision, and firewood for heating one common area. Snoring and smells were the backdrop to common survival in the house at night. The lights were not turned on, and excessive emotion in discussing sleep was not encouraged. No one could cry secretly because others could hear the sounds. The house hears, people hear. Emotions in the kitchen and alcoves were controlled in the same way as the hearth and correspondence. You couldn't flirt by the wall because it would be noticeable breathing in the house. That meant it was noticeable. That meant it was forbidden. Therefore, silence did not mean freedom, it meant self-control. Days off did not give servants freedom from the rules of conduct. The owners often monitored how servants represented the house outside of work because the house had a reputation and a name. Servants had to uphold the reputation of the house by going to church, listening to the sermon, and then answering questions about what they had remembered. Even outside the gates of the mansion, a person remained a representative. It was like continuing the role of an actor, but without a stage. An actor has a stage, a servant had a house, and people. The style of speech, behavior when walking, and appearance in the city could be evaluated as strictly as the order in the bedroom. A servant who was too independent could cause a review of his income or position in the fall. No romance, forbidden literature, or tobacco were welcome in such a role as representatives of the house outside. Therefore, self-control must be constant. The servants' meals were organized on a residual basis, although they were not kept hungry. In large houses, there was a clear division: food for the masters and food for the servants' hall. The exquisite dishes prepared for formal dinners rarely made it to the staff's table. They were given simple, hearty, but monotonous food. The basis of their diet was meat, but not of the best quality. Often it was lamb or boiled beef, which was served day after day. Staff meat was purchased separately from the butcher and was cheaper. Variety of flavors was not considered necessary for those who did physical labor. Vegetables and fruits were also distributed hierarchically. The best fruits from the garden went to the master's table, while rotten or bruised ones could go to the kitchen. Servants only saw exotic fruits such as pineapples or peaches on the trays they carried. It was strictly forbidden to taste them under penalty of dismissal for theft. An interesting feature was the tradition of beer money or beer distribution. In those days, beer was considered safer than water and a source of calories. Servants were entitled to a certain amount of weak ale per day. It was one of the few pleasures available to them legally. The process of eating itself was strictly ritualized. The butler sat at the head of the table, opposite the housekeeper. They ate in silence or engaged in restrained conversation on permitted topics. Leaving the table was only allowed with the permission of a senior member of the household. No relaxation or merriment was allowed during meals. The servants sometimes got the leftovers from the master's meals, but this depended on the generosity of the owners and the rules of the house. In some houses, leftovers were supposed to be thrown away or given to the poor so as not to spoil the servants. In others, it was a pleasant bonus to the meager diet. Bread, cheese, and tea were the basis of breakfast and snacks. Tea was the cheapest, often stale or of poor quality. Sugar was rationed, and every piece was counted. Housekeepers kept a close eye on the consumption of groceries, locking the cupboards with a key. In small houses with only one maid, she often finished what was left over from the masters. Her diet depended directly on the family's appetite. If the masters ate everything, the maid might be left with a piece of bread. This put her in a humiliating position of dependence. Meal times were also limited. Servants had to eat quickly so they could return to their duties. Chewing food slowly was considered an unacceptable luxury. They often ate standing up or on the go if there were guests in the house. Food was fuel, not pleasure. It was supposed to give strength for work, but not cause addiction to luxury. This gastronomic segregation reminded servants every day of their place in the social food chain. A servant's clothing was both his passport and his prison. The uniform did not simply indicate membership of the staff, it shaped behavior and self-perception. The fabrics were chosen for their durability, but were often coarse and uncomfortable to wear. Cheap wool was itchy and irritated the skin, but it had to be endured in silence. For maids, starched aprons and bonnets were a must. The starch made the fabric as stiff as cardboard. The collars rubbed their necks raw, and the stiff cuffs restricted their arm movements. Any speck on the white background was noticeable, so they had to be obsessively clean. They changed clothes several times a day. In the morning, they put on a calico work dress for dirty work, cleaning fireplaces and washing floors. In the afternoon, they had to change into a black wool dress with a white apron for serving and meeting guests. These changes took up precious leisure time. Footwear was a separate problem. Lightweight shoes with thin soles were required to move around the house silently, but such shoes did not provide support for the feet during many hours of walking and standing. By evening, the feet were swollen and burning, making every step torture. The footmen's uniforms were even more theatrical and uncomfortable. Liveries with gold braid, stockings, and breeches turned the men into living decorations. These clothes were tight, hot, and required complex care. Powdered hair added to the discomfort, causing itching. The cost of the uniform was often deducted from the servant's salary, especially in the first year of service. The person was effectively paying for the right to wear shackles. If the uniform became unusable, the cost of a new one was also borne by the employee. Corsets were mandatory for all female servants. Working in a tightly laced corset, bending over, and carrying heavy loads was incredibly difficult. It restricted breathing and often led to fainting in stuffy rooms. But refusing to wear a corset was considered the height of impropriety. Uniforms erased gender differences, turning people into faceless figures. All maids looked the same, like tin soldiers. This helped their employers not to notice them as individuals, perceiving them only as moving objects of interior design. In winter, the thin uniform was cold in unheated corridors, and in summer, the thick wool was unbearably hot. The clothing was not suited to the climatic conditions inside the house. No one was interested in the comfort of the servants. Only their appearance mattered. Taking off the uniform at the end of the day was a moment of physical and psychological liberation. Only when left in their nightshirts could they feel like themselves again. But after a few hours, they had to climb back into that rigid shell. The worst nightmare of any servant was dismissal without a reference. In the Victorian world, a letter of recommendation was the only document confirming a person's trustworthiness. Without it, a person instantly became an outcast, barred from all respectable households. Losing one's job meant not just losing work, but the collapse of one's entire life. The reasons for dismissal could be the most trivial: a broken vase, a cheeky reply, suspicion of theft, or simply the mistress's bad mood. The servant was completely powerless against the arbitrariness of the employer. There were no trade unions or labor protection laws. A dismissed servant had to leave the house immediately, often within an hour. Their belongings were thrown out onto the street, and they found themselves alone in a huge world, without housing, without money, and without prospects. Most had no savings, as their wages were meager. For women, losing their job often meant a direct path to prostitution or a workhouse. The fear of falling to the bottom of society forced them to endure any humiliation and abuse. Their employers skillfully manipulated this fear, demanding complete obedience. Pregnancy for an unmarried maid was a disaster. Such a girl was dismissed with disgrace, condemning both her and her child to starvation. No one wanted to hire a fallen woman. Society turned away from them with hypocritical indignation. Old age was also a death sentence. A servant was needed as long as he was strong and healthy. As soon as his strength began to fade, he could be discarded like old furniture. Only a few lucky ones received a small pension from grateful masters. Most faced a poverty-stricken old age. The recommendation system was a tool for blackmail. An employer could write an ambiguous phrase in a letter that would put an end to a career. Honest, but prone to stubbornness. Such a description could scare off future employers. A servant was a hostage to the opinions of others. Rumors spread quickly among the nobility. If a servant was blacklisted, he might never find work in that city again. He would have to change his name or move to another part of the country to start from scratch. Not having a homemaid getting fired a huge deal. A person lost not only their income, but also the roof over their head and their social circle. They fell out of the system, which was the only world they knew. This absolute dependence on the will of the master was the foundation of the entire system of servitude. It was based on fear of the abyss of poverty that lay just beyond the threshold of the master's house. We have seen that the Victorian mansion was not a fairy tale palace, but a cruel machine that ground human destinies. Luxury and comfort of the highest class were paid for with the sweat, pain, and humiliation of those who remained in the shadows. This system thrived on fear and hopelessness, leaving people with no choice. If you are interested in the hidden history of everyday life, write in the comments which area you would like to learn about in future issues. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new investigations into the dark sides of the past.